Hey, good morning, everyone. Happy Monday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. I appreciate you being with me, and uh, I apologize for having to take about a 1 week hiatus, but pressing family business, and so a little bit of a little bit of a recap here. Last week I was gone. I was out of pocket. My oldest sister in Arkansas passed away. She had lived a long, full life. And so my wife and I had to travel to Arkansas where I preached the funeral for my sister. And, she was a lady whose her entire life revolved around her family and her faith. And when you are honored, may I use that term, to preach the funeral of someone whose entire life has been focused on family and on faith, it really truly is an honor. And while obviously we mourn the loss of the family relationship here on earth, we stand in absolute full confidence and assurance and peace that she has something far better. And that just gives more peace than anything in this world. When Paul wrote to the Thessalonians and he said, "Brethren, I would not have you to be ignorant, or that you sorrow as others who do not have hope." Well, you know what? We've got the assurance. It's not just a hope for us. It's been manifested. It's been proven by the resurrection of Jesus Christ and by His coming that we have eternal life, and that the passing from this life is not the end. As Jesus Himself said, John 8:51, John 11:25 and 26, those who believe in Him will never die. Wow. Do you catch the power of that? On Facebook, week before last, I was in some conversations with the enemies of covenant eschatology. And over and over and over and over again, I posed the question, what does never die mean? I could not get one of them to hit a key to answer the question. You know why? Because they know to give the biblical answer is to defeat their own eschatology. That's why. So anyway, all of that said, a little bit of an update on the health situation with me and my family. I had shared with you that my doctor had initially said, after a strength test and after x-rays, that he was 99.9% certain I was going to have surgery on my right shoulder. The pain has just been horrific, and I concurred. I didn't see any way out of it. But nonetheless, he took an MRI. And when I went back for the review, he said, "Don, I'm not going to cut you." He said, "You have a bone spur that has come back on your shoulder." And he said, "I could go in there and remove it, but then you'd be in a sling and for 10 weeks, and you'd be without the use of the arm for almost a year, just like you were the first time." Yeah, I don't look forward to that. And he said, "Secondly, your rotator cuff is thin, but," he said, "it's just because you're old." Thank you. Anyway, so he said, "Look, let's just put it off for about 10 weeks. Let's get you back here and see how things are." And look, thankfully, the excruciating, severe knife in the shoulder pain has let up. So it's sort of kind of tolerable as long as I don't use the arm very much. So I'm thankful for that. But you see, all of that's really minor stuff, all right? I got to tell you, the absolutely wonderful news is that, as many of you already know, my wife is a 2-time cancer survivor. 2 years ago, a little over, she had breast cancer and reconstructive surgery. Well, recently she found another lump. Needless to say, we were just really, really frightened, really concerned. Well, we spent 3 days, week before last, in Tulsa at the Cancer Treatment Center. Fantastic facility, by the way. And after 3 days of extensive testing, they said, Mrs. Preston, you do not have cancer. Whew. To say that that's a humongous relief, to say that we've offered up multitudinous prayers of praise and thanks to God is an understatement. And to those of you who have asked and inquired about our situation, I want to say thank you so very, very much. It truly is appreciated. Okay, that kind of brings us a little bit of up to date. I do want to take notice and remind you that I just introduced a brand spanking new book entitled Watching for the Parousia, Were Jesus' Apostles Confused? The book will regularly sell for $18.95 during the month of July for U.S. orders only, all right? U.S. orders only, $15.95 post-paid. Go to my website, donkpreston.com, bibleprophecy.com. Now, I bring this up again because we are looking at Matthew chapter 24 and the so-called contrast between Matthew 24, 4 to 35, and Matthew 24, 36 and following. One of those supposed contrasts is that Jesus in verses 4 to 35 talked about those days. But in verse 36 and following, he talks about that day, but of that day and hour. Now, you know, in the first place, folks, just simple grammar should tell us that when he says, but of that day and hour, he's talking about some antecedent reference that he has been discussing. There is certainly not any overwhelming grammatical rule that suggests or demands, okay, now I'm talking about something different. No. There is no such grammatical rule. It is literally now concerning that day and hour. But you see, let me remind you, the foundational premise of all futurist interpretations of Matthew 24, 36 and following, is that in verse 2 and 3 of that same chapter, Jesus had predicted the fall of Jerusalem, the destruction of the temple. The apostles, bless their hearts, were confused. They didn't believe that temple would ever be destroyed. Or they believed that the only way that temple could ever be destroyed was if it was at the end of time. That was John Calvin's view. John Calvin said there was no way those apostles could think about the possible destruction of Jerusalem and the destruction of that temple unless it was at the end of time. Really? Were those apostles ignorant of the fact that the temple and Jerusalem had been utterly destroyed in 586 BC? You mean to tell me they didn't know about that? Well, here's a hint. The Jews actually had a feast day commemorating that event. And you know, here are the apostles, good faithful Jews, who undoubtedly commemorated the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in 586 BC, and yet we're supposed to think that they could not conceive of the first century temple unless it was at the end of time and at the so-called imaginary end of the Christian age. I'm sorry, folks, that doesn't even make good nonsense. But you see, that assumption that the apostles were confused, they were ignorant, they were simply wrong, underlies and drives the entire futurist paradigm of Matthew 24. It's why I wrote this book. I once believed that the apostles were confused. I once believed that the apostles were ignorant. I once believed that the apostles linked the fall of Jerusalem, the coming of the Lord, and the end of the age, but they were basically, excuse the terminology, dumb as a box of rocks when they did so. But that view is wrong. Go to my website, donkpreston.com, bibleprophecy.com. Right there on the front page, you'll see the offer. $15.95 total delivered price, U.S. orders only for the month of July 2020. Now watch this, because you see, there is no dichotomy between those days and that day in Matthew 24, 4 to 35, and verse 36 and following. Notice Matthew chapter 24 and verse 19. Now, pardon me, Jesus speaks about the time of the preaching of the gospel into all of the world. That was going to take that generation, basically. And he talks about the erecting of the abomination of desolation. And he says, during those days, let him who is on the housetop not come down to take any of his goods out of his house. Let him who is in the field not come back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing in those days. The days, plural, of the abomination of desolation. Verse 22. And unless those days should be shortened, no flesh would be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. Now watch verse 29. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars of the heavens shall fall, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. Then they will see the sign of the Son of Man in the heaven, and they will see the Son of Man coming. What had the apostles asked about? The coming of the Lord. And now, as the climax of those days, they will see the coming of the Lord. Now watch. Matthew 24:37. As it was, as in the days of Noah were, also will be the coming of the Son of Man. Do you catch the power of this? As the days of Noah. Well, there's that plural days being used directly in reference to the day of the Lord, to the coming of Christ. But as in the days before the flood, they were eating, they were drinking, they were marrying, they were giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark. And they did not know until the flood came and took them all away. So also will be the coming of the Son of Man. So here right there in the text we have days of the Son of Man, day of the Son of Man. And oh, by the way, as we continue our study, we're going to see that we have the days of Noah, just like the days of Christ. We have the day in which Noah entered the flood or entered the ark, and the day when the Son of Man would be revealed. Folks, there is no contrast between those days and that day. That is an imaginary, contrived, invented contrast that has no merit. Well, look, I'm out of time for today. Thank you so much for joining me for this morning's morning musings. Don't forget, order your copy. Watching for the Parousia, where Jesus' apostles confused. You'll be glad you did. I want to tell you, you'll be blown away by the amount of evidence to prove. No, it wasn't Jesus' apostles that were confused. It's the later commentators who are confused. Okay? I'll see you on the flip side.